You were sharing the ADU that you had constructed at the back of your own property. Tell me a little bit about that.
As more and more time goes on, we're paying more and more money for less space.
This seems like an ideal solution for somebody that can't afford 2,000 or 3,000 square feet.
There is a market for these types of structures, for smaller structures. And again, it may not be for everyone.
Yeah. So you said you had backlash. Are you talking from the neighbors, or where was this backlash coming from?
The houses are only about like 12 to 1,500 square feet.
They have to use a crane to bring that in, or how does that work?
Where folks are asking, they're really getting innovative in this housing market. Can I do like a duplex ADU in my backyard? And it's like, no, I think we're pushing it.
We are back for another episode. Thank you guys for joining us, and big shout out to all our subscribers. Those of you on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, thanks for continuing to support our channel and our content. We really appreciate you guys. And our guest today is an expert on brand development and a content strategist. She's also an Atlanta-based realtor and investor who built a startup called Gather ADU, which is short for Accessory Dwelling Units. It's a user-friendly digital platform that streamlines the entire journey of building, planning, and constructing your own ADU. She's been featured on CNBC, the New York Times, Black Enterprise, and other media outlets. Please welcome Precious Price. Precious, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me, Mike. I appreciate it. I'm super excited about our conversation.
Yeah, me too. You're on the go. So, I mean, I know we had some scheduling stuff going on, but that's a good thing. You're a mover and a shaker. So I'm glad we finally nailed down a time to talk, and really appreciate you being here. And the way I found you was in my YouTube feed. That's how I came across who you were. And that's what I love about this job, because when I find interesting people, I'll often reach out to them and invite them on our platform. And so it was great that you came up in my feed, because you were sharing the ADU that you had constructed at the back of your own property. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so that was, oh my gosh, that project was 5 years ago now.
Wow.
So 5 years ago. So this was in the thick of the pandemic. Everything had kind of halted with COVID going around. And I found myself back at home in a property that I had purchased just 6 months prior. So if you do recall, the global pandemic was declared around like March 12th of 2020. And I remember so vividly because it was the day before my birthday, and I was having
good timing.
Right. But just 6 months prior to that, I had purchased my very first property on the south side of Atlanta. It was a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom, 2.5-bathroom rent style home with a huge backyard. And at the time, I had been renting that property out because I was still working as a corporate consultant with like this global firm in marketing and strategy and all of that. So I was never in Atlanta for the most part, Monday through Thursday. I would be out at those businesses. So when I found myself back in that house, and on top of that, to be quite frank, like paying my own mortgage because I couldn't rent it out due to safety, I needed to figure something out. And I remember being in my kitchen, just looking out the window, and I'm like, that backyard is huge. And when my family, I'm from Chicago, so when my family first kind of came down and they saw the backyard, they're like, oh my gosh, you should put a pool. From Chicago. It's like, pool does not offer a lot of ROI.
Yeah, right.
So that's when I got the amazing idea of, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put a tiny house in the backyard, and then that is going to allow me the best place for me to stay, because I don't need 3 bedrooms, 2.5 bathrooms. And at that point, I'd be able to continue safely renting this structure or renting the primary home out. Later that year, so I did a lot of planning. This was all by myself, And again, in the thick of the pandemic, where many government offices were kind of closed, right, in order to do the planning and all of that. And I do recall the city of Atlanta, they were just transitioning all of their kind of planning and permitting and that whole process into an online portal. So that was a bit helpful, but still a lot of hiccups. Yeah. Nonetheless, we had started the build in October of 2020 that year. That is when the prefabricated structure, I purchased this 12 by 24 prefabricated structure to be converted. I had considered a number of options, Mike. I'm not sure if you've heard of the container homes as well.
I have. I've seen those too, yeah.
Really, really cool. I really wanted a container home. Unfortunately, the clearance between my home and my neighbor's home just was not enough for a flatbed to deliver a shipping container. And there's just tons of trees. um,
Yeah.
so
They
yeah,
have to use a crane to bring that in, or how does that work?
I think they could, but I have like huge pine trees on my property too. So if there's no clearance between the house and then there's also no clearance like up top for them to do the crane, the only
Oh.
option was for me to do something a little smaller. And my next best bet at that point was finding a prefabricated structure.
Mhm.
So I found a manufacturer who basically they build like these residential sheds, like sheds that you can just put in your backyard, more of a she shed, a man cave, a backyard office, that type of thing. I purchased that 12 by 24, so that's a little under 300 square feet. And I decided to use that as a shell structure to build out a basically like studio apartment in my backyard. Um, so many issues.
So sticky. Do it again. Push that.
Look.
The whole ceiling is moving.
So much back and forth over budget, behind the timeline, but we did end up successfully completing that by March of 2021, crazy full circle. And at that point, because we were so behind at that point, I then had decided to actually rent it on Airbnb for a little bit to recoup some of that cost. And I was floored by how popular the structure was, by like the return that I could get, by the interest that so many people had in living in a small structure. Because I recall a lot of the kind of, I guess, pushback I received when documenting the process, which is likely that video that you ran across and saw of me documenting that whole process. I remember I received a little bit of backlash because folks are like, well, who the hell wants to live in less than 200 square feet? Like, why do we need these tiny structures? And it was really, honestly, that was the inception point for so much. Like the project had so many lessons, but it was also just a really good opportunity for us to see and look at in practice here in the city of Atlanta the fact that there is a market for these types of structures, for smaller structures. And again, it may not be for everyone, right? Like we're not saying put a 4-person family
Mhm.
in there, but it can really work for populations like students, like seniors, like workforce folks that are kind of teachers or police or firemen that need to be closer to the urban
Yeah.
center, but in a time where inflation is crazy, housing prices are crazy, they may not be able to afford it. That is a really good
Yeah.
option.
So you said you had backlash. Are you talking from the neighbors, or where was this backlash coming
Oh,
from?
from
Really?
everywhere. Yeah, the neighbors definitely. So to give you context, Mike, when I purchased my home in October of 2019, I am by far the youngest person on my
Okay.
block by at least 30
30 years.
years.
Wow. Okay.
By at least
Yeah.
30 years, by at least 30 years. All of these folks have been in their homes for at least 25 to 30 years. They have been here. They resistance.
You are this
like,
young mover and shaker, like coming and shaking things up, right?
yeah, exactly. Especially again, like here in the South, it's like every single lot, at least in this area, right? Most areas they're sitting on about a quarter of an acre, and the houses are only about like 12 to 1,500 square feet. So that's a lot of extra space that we're just not utilizing. But what I found was that so many of my neighbors were very adamant on using that space to do what I called lawn wars. Everyone wanted to make sure their lawn looked the best and their lawn looked the most perfect. If one person is mowing their lawn, you better bet that somebody else is going to be out there the next day to make
Yeah.
sure that theirs looks a little
Yeah.
better. So it was really just a matter of them not wanting folks to, I guess, maybe come to the area.
Oh,
I don't
okay. Bringing people
I
in.
don't know. Like,
Okay.
exactly, because it was more like it's a quiet street, all of
Yeah.
that. And then on top of that, just the backlash via social media as well. Especially when the videos and the story really began to gain
Mhm.
traction, there was tons of support.
Mhm.
Don't get me wrong, so much support. But I was super surprised about some of the backlash that was received in terms of the fact that this is a smaller structure, or the feeling, right, that so many folks tend to have of like, as more and more time goes on, we're paying more and more money for less space. And that was kind of the sentiment that folks were feeling of like, well, why are we just putting folks in the backyard? Or even more so, this sentiment that didn't quite make sense to me of like, well, why would I want to live like, why would I want my landlord to live in the backyard?
Mhm.
Or why would I want to be so close? That's way too close. And it's like, you all, everyone knows of a townhouse,
Well, yeah.
right?
Or an apartment complex. Sometimes you're right beside your building manager or superintendent, right?
Exactly. So some of the sentiments just didn't have any standing, but I was really surprised on some of that backlash. But the funny part about that is, like, as more and more time went on, as I mentioned, that was 5 years ago now. As more and more time has gone on, we are now in kind of like post-pandemic era. So much is changing. Costs are still increasing. The conversations around tiny homes, they were very limited back then, at least for like the southern region. They were very, very limited. Now, this is a conversation that cities across the nation, and I'll almost argue like cities across the nation are starting to have this conversation on what does it look like for us to reform our zoning, reform our policy so that we can create more housing and get more people off of the streets or just into safe and affordable housing. So accessory dwelling units and these backyard tiny homes or backyard guest house, they are so much more popular.
Mhm.
Like the jump in the number of searches that people are doing for these types of things, it's just getting more and more. So I think, like, as we were talking about, my journey, my project served as a really great, like, a lot of folks tend to find it inspiring. It's like I pushed through so
Yeah.
much. You watch the docuseries and I'm crying and I've lost money. And they found it really inspiring that it's like, okay, you still push through and you actually made that
Yeah.
happen. So I'm I would say I'm pretty proud of myself because at the very least it has planted a seed in a lot of folks'
Yeah.
minds, and even comments and the feedback. A lot of people just like, I didn't even know this was possible. I had no idea how to navigate this process, and I've been trying to do it for years, and I don't know how. And it's so great to see that you were able to make it happen. And I think that was the best inception point for Gather ADU.
Yeah, and I do want to get into that. It's beautiful. You should be proud of that. It's a beautiful home. Like the videos that I've seen, it's very cozy. I remember showing it to my wife. I was like, I would live in that.
I designed it myself.
Really, it's very nice. Like it's very cozy and inviting, and I mean, it's so ideal for one person and maybe two, depending on
Yeah.
the lifestyle. But
Mhm.
I get how that has become more popular in recent years, just with the cost of real estate in the United States and really globally, and just the economy and inflation. People are looking for ways to cut costs.
Yeah.
So I mean, this seems like an ideal solution for somebody that can't afford 2 or 3,000 square feet, and it might not be feasible for them. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And then on top of that, I think more than like whether or not you can afford it, it's also in this post pandemic era where I remember reading a New York Times article where they were saying that we are in a loneliness epidemic post pandemic, right? Like so many folks are just living individually or just like by themselves. They don't have a sense of community. I think these accessory dwelling units and backyard tiny homes could serve as a way to put that sense of community back into a neighborhood or even just like your property. But even furthermore, a lot of the folks that I now talk to, that we speak to, that become our clients, these are people that are like, hey, I'm moving my aging parent in. Like I'm moving my in-law in, or actually like my adult kids, they're kind of out there struggling right now. So we want to go ahead and pull the equity out of this house, build that, and they'll just be right there. And now it allows all of those folks or that family what's called multi-generational living, meaning that you are putting that sense of community there. You are sharing resources, and there is a sense of group economics, which I think is phenomenal in this day and
Yeah,
age.
yeah, I agree. And you had mentioned that there was a point where you lost money when you were putting this together. You went over budget, I think. Was that right?
Mhm.
And like, so what
Mhm.
happened?
Correct. Oh gosh, I went through a set of maybe three
Oh,
contractors.
wow.
So because this had I won't say never, right? But for the most part, there were not a ton of contractors who were familiar with doing a tiny house. And though it is a tiny house, it is easy for some of those professionals to underestimate, like, oh, it's just 300 square feet.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yes, the top is 300 square feet, but like below the ground, it has all of the bells and whistles of a real
Mhm.
house. So it is not just like a handyman
Yeah.
project.
You're talking like a poured foundation and all that, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
all of that poured foundation. You have to lay pipes. Typically, a lot of folks tend to connect it to the utilities within the main home. All of that is that's real
Yeah.
work. And I found that a lot of the contractors that I was sourcing, I remember I interviewed maybe 3 of them. The one that I ended up going with, he was kind of a mid-range price because there was one person that was super expensive, but now looking back, right, like 2020 hindsight is like, oh my gosh, you weren't expensive at all. I ended up going with a mid-range guy, and he had told me that he had done like home projects. He had showed me some projects, and long story short, he had never done
Oh,
anything like
really?
this. They were totally winging it. And I, of course, because I was documenting this process, I'm going in and I have my camera and I'm taking photos and I'm looking. And mind you, this is my first like real estate project as well. That was my first real dive into it. So I don't know what to expect or what to look out for. However, I just remember going in and it's like, okay, I think this drywall is a bit uneven. These corners are not sharp at all. The paint, the flooring, it's messy. And again, you all are continuing to like ask for more and more money. So it got to a point where I realized, okay, I think these people are not as competent in this area as they have made themselves to believe. So I ended up getting another contractor who came in and kind of went and fixed a bit of their work, at least within the bathroom. And then there was an issue with that contractor. How do I even describe the issue? I don't even know, but there was an issue with that contractor to where he just like totally like left the job. He's like, no, I don't want to do this anymore. After we had came in and I started asking questions like, okay, like, are you able to, make this happen or do this? And he just kind of felt like, okay, I'm a little taken aback. You don't trust me.
Wow, this sounds like a full-on reality TV experience.
You have to watch the docuseries to like truly get it. And then I finally ended up landing on a contractor who basically like had to go in and fix a lot of their work and basically put band-aids over little things. So a lot of how it looks now, and I do get a lot of praises for the design and all of that, but some of the pieces, it does not look exactly how I wanted it to look in terms of the design. There was supposed to be so much more storage, a lot more customization, but because of so much going on during the project process, that just could not happen. So some of the quirky features, like I'm not sure if you remember from the video or not, but you walk into the front door and there's kind of like a little peninsula just right there. And so much of the feedback, any tour that I give, is like, well, that's just taking up space. Why is that right there? That was actually supposed to be like an entire bookshelf and more storage, but because everything had went wrong, they had to just close it off and block it, and it's kind of serves as, I guess, a nightstand now. So it was a very interesting project, but you know how they say like some lessons are far more expensive than others. Very, very expensive lessons in that, but it was really the springboard for everything that I'm doing.
Right.
So I'm super grateful. In the moment, stress.
Of course,
stress.
Yeah, definitely. No, I can understand that. And there was a certain level of red tape and government bureaucracy you had to deal with, like permits and stuff. Like how did all that play out?
Oh my goodness. That took forever. I think that is a big reason why I mentioned to you that the idea popped into my head around, I would say like March or April. We weren't truly able to get started with everything until about the end of October or November because of so much of the red tape and also the delays with a lot of the government offices that were just happening in general. Like they had more priorities during the global pandemic than someone just wanting to convert a shed in their backyard. So it was just really the delays and then the factors of bouncing around from different departments because it was something that had not, at least in the way that I did it, been done before. They didn't quite know how to approach it either. So I found myself, and that is honestly how I began becoming far more civically engaged in my community, how I am now, attending zoning meetings, attending different community meetings, housing association meetings, that type of thing, is because I was really wanting to get in the face of these folks who are the decision makers and let them know that, hey, I am doing this, but I'm seeing a real need for us to do even more of this. What does it look like for us to streamline this process?
So we fast forward, you now launch this startup called Gather ADU. Tell me about that. What is that?
So Gather ADU is an interactive platform for homeowners who have extra land or they just have extra space. This could be a garage, a basement, an attic, or you have all of that space in your backyard, like I did, and you are wanting to create housing using that space, whether that is for a loved one or family, whether that is for your home office, or you are wanting to rent that to kind of help offset your own housing costs. So what we do is we walk through that entire process A to Z for them, and our platform is basically like a project management platform that we've built natively for them to see every single aspect of the process from the point of feasibility, meaning is this even possible for me? How do I know? Because your average homeowner likely, if you ask your average homeowner, they likely don't know what their zoning is, how their property is zoned. Many of us often think that, okay, well, yeah, I purchased this house, I can do whatever
Yeah.
I want with it.
Yeah.
Not quite. Not quite
Try
at
living
all.
in an
So
HOA. Man, we can't even
exactly.
paint anything on our house without like question,
Without
yeah.
permission, without a board approval.
But anyway, you were saying, yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, so we take them through that point, which again, a lot of it in the beginning stages is education. And that was the gap in the market that we found. Number one was education in terms of people just knowing what are all of the steps that go into this. I know I want to do it, but I can't even find an outline or a checklist or anything on my city's website about
Yeah.
how. And that is a problem.
Yeah.
So number one is that education piece that we kind of walk them through. Is this feasibility? We do it for them. And it really is like an entire done for you service that's enabled by our tech platform in terms of how we manage it. From that point, we will design the floor plan. We have architects on our team that design architectural plans. And we actually work with the city on behalf of the homeowner to go ahead and get that permit approved. So we will handle everything. All you need to do is just tell us a yes or a no and help us design the floor plan. And we get it through and get you to the point of an approved permit. For right now, we are only building in California and Georgia. But as more and more time goes on, our hope is to continue expanding so that we can offer more construction services nationwide, the same way that we do our plans and permitting service. But it's been a game changer. And you'd be surprised, even the number of folks we get calls and from folks and interest every single day, just because our SEO is really, really good, because there's not a lot of information out about it. And the funny part is, Mike, is that even when folks are looking for regulations in their city or state, and you can think of the most random city, I kid you not, we've likely had a call.
Really?
And they would they'll search on Google because that's where everyone goes. But because the city has not released any information about it, and we have thousands of blog pages, they end up likely calling us and sometimes mistakenly thinking that we are the city.
Oh, wow.
and we have to tell them, it's like, no, like, this is really good information. But they'll get off the call and we'll give them everything that they need. Even if you are not like ready to pay anything, it's a matter of, hey, this is the direction that you need to go. And that was really the biggest piece of the mission, is how can we empower more homeowners with the education and the tools to create more housing to alleviate this crisis that we are currently in. Even if it just is a drop in the ocean, it has done something more rather than contributing to the problem. We're really trying to help eradicate it. But it's not one size fits all. And I know a ton of people are like, this is not going to solve the housing crisis. Absolutely not. It takes a number of different factors and pieces and solutions in order to truly solve it. But this is just one piece of the solution.
Yeah. And is there a point where you're going to be nationwide? Like, do you have regulatory hurdles in every state, or like, how does that work?
Every single state is a regulatory hurdle, and not even state, like county, because it typically goes by county in terms of these regulations, and then it would go by city. So your county has regulations, and then your city also has regulations. There is a lot of red tape, and because this is so place-based, that is why we kind of like every single place that we stand up, it's almost one by one, because we have to go through the factor of actually connecting with the folks within the local planning office, getting to know what those requirements are, because every single place is different. In one place, you might be able to do a detached one in your backyard. In another place, you might only be able to attach it to your house. So it really just depends. But yeah, there is a lot of regulatory tape when it comes to it.
And you do this in California. That's one of the states, California and Georgia. We do have listeners and viewers, many of them in California. What kind of regulatory hurdles can they expect? It's obviously dependent on the county. Is there any state stuff they have to deal with?
So honestly, California residents are very, very lucky. I'm not going to say there isn't too much, because there are always there's always red tape and regulatory hurdles, but the good piece about California is that statewide, there was like a state mandate that if you have a house and let's say that it is not in an HOA, for the most part, you are able to do not only an accessory dwelling unit, meaning one detached structure in the back, and they're able to actually go up to 1,200 square feet, whereas here in the city of Atlanta, you can go up to 750, only 750. But out in California as well, they've also now regulated what's called a JADU, meaning a junior ADU that is typically attached. Most oftentimes it's folks converting their garage, but you can actually do both of those structures. So I wouldn't say for California, it is like a lot easier. For the most part, we know that you can do it. For other places, it's almost like a scavenger hunt of us finding information online and calling their office. And it's like, okay, can they do it? What are the building requirements and restrictions for it? So for the most part, California is good. It is when you are outside of California and we're doing those planned and permitting services outside of there that it becomes a little more difficult in terms of figuring out, okay, what exactly can you do? Can you do 2 stories? And we're even getting to the point where folks are asking, they're really getting innovative in this housing market. Can I do like a duplex ADU in my backyard? And it's like, no, I think we're pushing it.
Are you getting those calls from California? Is that where people are asking?
We're getting those calls. We're getting those calls from California.
They got to keep up with those high mortgages.
No, seriously, everywhere. Like we get calls, California, Washington, Oregon, New York, Indiana. I just had a call this morning with someone out in Florida. Like it is all this conversation is being had all over. And I think that's the biggest piece that I love about what we've been able to create here is that this is a lot of data on housing, data on what homeowners need and what they are asking for in terms of how can they create more housing in their community. And I think the more and more time that goes on and the more and more work that we do, our hope is that we eventually are able to begin partnering on a heavier level with local government offices to create more educational materials, to streamline this process, to create some pre-approved plans. And there are some cities where we already have our pre-approved plans already there, meaning that if you choose that plan, they would streamline that and it's a lot quicker process than your standard level. Because on average, I believe in LA County, we just did this research, on average, I believe they said it takes right around 300 days for something like an accessory dwelling unit to be built from start to finish, including the planning and all of that.
Yeah. And you want to obviously speed that up because that's almost a year, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
When we were off mic, we were talking about the differences between the prefab and the, the regular builds. I don't know the terminology, but you know what I'm talking about, right? So, so tell me what is it that you guys specialize in at Gather ADU, and like tell me the differences, because I know people buy those container homes and they can have those delivered. A big 18-wheeler drops it off on your yard. What's optimal, and explain the differences.
Okay, let's do a quick crash course on ADUs. So number 1, ADU stands for accessory dwelling unit. An ADU can be either attached to your home, meaning that you have a garage that you want to convert, there's a basement, there is an attic that you may want to convert, or you might even want to add some additional square footage, and then that serves as a separate attached accessory dwelling unit. They can also be detached, meaning that you may convert a detached garage. We're seeing a lot of folks begin to put apartments or studios or even 2 bedrooms on top of their garages in their backyard or to the side of their house. And that's also more of a detached accessory dwelling unit example. And then, of course, you have the standard example, kind of how I did it, but not really, meaning that it's detached in the backyard. It's standalone. It is not the conversion of any type of other structure. It is a structure of its own that you have now stood up. When it comes to accessory dwelling units, you can go the route of converting an existing structure, meaning that would be the conversion of a garage or a building, an outbuilding that you just have on your property. And it serves as a really good starting place. And typically conversions are going to be a lot cheaper than if you go with what's called, that terminology that you were talking about, a stick built option, meaning that it is built from the ground up. Now, when you're looking at the conversions, we're seeing way more folks. I'm sure you've heard of the Lowe's sheds, Home Depot. I'm just going to order a kit from Amazon.
I used to
So
drive
those
by
are
those with
options.
my wife and look at them. Hey, we should get one of those.
I remember again, like I started the conversation so early. So when they started, like Amazon released it, Lowe's, and people were at Home Depot sending me photos of the sheds, like, you said this, and it's like, yeah, yeah. So with that, you can convert structures like that as well. The piece that we always like to tell people to be mindful of, because even a lot of folks look at my story as an example. You'd be surprised the number of people that call us and say, it's like, yeah, I just bought a 12 by 24, just like me, 12 by
Yeah.
24, 12 by 26 structure. And, I'm wanting it to convert it. The piece that you must be mindful of is that even though a lot of these companies like Amazon or Lowe's or Home Depot, they will market it as, okay, this structure is only like $15,000. Yeah, but you still have to make it like abide by building restrictions and
Right.
regulations, meaning that it is like a big chunk of the cost for projects like this is, number one, going to be like your planning and permits cost with the city, but number two, actually connecting that structure to utilities. So yeah, you can order the Amazon box or
Mhm.
kit, and they say that you can put it up in 4 hours, but there's no running
Yeah.
water. It's not actually solidified to the ground. There is no foundation. And all of these are elements that you should really begin to think about when you are considering that. Now, especially with men, because we were speaking about this as well off mic, but when you consider a lot of the issues that we've been having recently in terms of climate change and all of
Mhm.
that, that then creates a conversation of it being even more adamant and important for you to go the route of getting something that truly has some structural integrity. That number two also is affixed to your property, because the piece that is a major difference as well, or a major key to this, is that a lot of folks don't realize it must be permanently affixed to your property for it to be considered an accessory dwelling unit and for it to actually increase your property value. If it is not permanently affixed, some cities or jurisdictions will look at it as like, oh, it's just a tiny house on wheels, which is basically an RV. And in many places, you can't even have an RV parked in your backyard, let alone have someone living in it. So these are all the different pieces and kind of the conversations that we are driving around really what this looks like, because it is a pretty intricate topic. In addition to a pretty intricate industry when you go about choosing to do something like this. However, there are options for whatever you see fit. But I will say as well that typically the best route in order to make something like this happen, because a major question that we get at Gather as well is, how do you finance something like this? And if you watch my experience, my story, I ended up actually using my personal credit and my business credit to finance that. So I had cards that I knew, okay, I'm going to leverage this. This might have like a 0% APR, or this one might have a lower interest rate, or whatever it is, but I'm going to use this to then purchase and fund this build. And then I am going to have a plan or a strategy on how I can recoup that money to pay that back, while also still getting the benefit of the structure that
Right.
I need. Does
Yeah,
that
it
make sense?
does. It does, definitely. And this addition to your property clearly raised its value, right? I'm assuming.
Mhm. Yeah.
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 And
Yeah. But the thing is, and it's, I wouldn't say it's hard to gauge. It's still, well, actually, no, it is still hard to gauge. So it has increased the value of my property, but it's also a matter of looking at the value of many properties for people who purchased pre-pandemic has increased astronomically
yeah.
anyway. So it's a matter of how much of that is contributed to the market versus how much of that is contributed to the ADU. When, as I've already mentioned, ADUs were not as
Yeah.
common in the city of Atlanta, at least when I did it. So we are just now getting to a point where I'm able to really, in order to kind of figure out that value, you need to have some comps, right? Your
Yeah.
comparable properties. And we're just now getting to the point where there are some comparable properties who they have an ADU or had an ADU or placed an ADU on their property, and they've sold. And that is a big piece as well. Like, you have to sell, meaning that someone is willing to pay that price. And now we know,
Yeah.
yes, there's the value.
It's almost a 2-for-1, really. Like that's like, in some listings they call those in-laws quarters, or you know what I mean? Like that can only be an asset to have extra living space. Like, I don't think that would ever be a deterrent for anybody. You know what I mean?
It's not a
No.
deterrent. It's just, it's the red tape of just how the real estate industry has worked and always always, for the most part at this point, will work. It's just like those comps are super important. And the main question, it is a main question as well of like, okay, well, how much value does it add to my property? Well, that depends on the market that you're in, and it also depends on what type of ADU you've added, how large you went. It's like, and I hate to say it, but it's like the answer is always it depends, because we get folks that call and it's like, well, what's the average cost for something like this? It depends. What is your market? What type of ADU are you wanting to do? What route are you wanting to take? Is this a conversion, or are you building from the ground up? So it's really hard to say. I will say, because I know you mentioned that you have some listeners who are in California. For California, for the most part, we typically are using a price per square footage of about 280, between 289 and 300. So for the most part, you should be able to use that if you know how large you're wanting to build. For the state of California, at least, multiply that by your square footage, your desired square footage, and you should be able to get a ballpark. And of course, as you get to different markets, Georgia, that is a lot lower.
Mhm.
So it really
Yeah. And how long did you live in yours? You lived in yours for a while, right?
I lived in mine for like 6 or 7 months. So this was after I had first put it on short term rental, so Airbnb, and that happened for about a year. And then thereafter, I actually rented it long term to some students for a year. So that was really great. I was able to get market rate rent. A lot of folks were surprised because they didn't think that you would be able to. But again, it's a studio
Yeah,
apartment.
yeah, definitely. Yeah.
It's a studio apartment. So I was able to get market rate. And after I had those long-term folks leave, that is when I then moved in for about 6 to 7 months. It was a really good way for me to, number one, update it, since folks had been
Mhm.
in it. I had never lived in it myself. Number one, I wanted to experience tiny living myself
Mhm.
too. But then number two, also as a way for me to do some additional work on it, since I did have a number of folks in and out over the past
Well,
few
you did an
years.
amazing job with it. And so why only 7 months? Did you get tired of it? Did you need more room? What happened?
So 7 months, because there was almost like how do I say it, a wrench thrown into plans. So when I moved to Atlanta back in 2018, I didn't have any family here. It was just me. So in 2023, actually, because that is right after I had moved out, I then moved out and I had kind of shifted everything. I was renting the primary house, but and I was renting it by room. I ended up moving into the main bedroom of the primary home and still house hacking. But my younger sister needed to come down to Atlanta and relocate with her and her small family. And that is why I ended up only spending about 6 or 7 months, because that then served as a separate space for them, which again is another major benefit of ADUs, right? Like when you have some type of, I don't know, family emergency or crises, or even when we think about what happened out in LA with the wildfires, it is a really great way for, if something happens, you have somewhere for your family to be so that they are not on the streets and all of that. Think about insurance payouts, and oh my goodness, it's just a lot.
If somebody's ever looking to downsize their life, cut costs, get into tiny living, possibly an ADU, how can they know if this is for them? You've got a lot of experience in this now. You've lived in this environment for an extended period of time. How can they know if this lifestyle is for them?
Mm, you gotta watch it. Watch it. Go on YouTube. That's really like where I would say most of the enthusiasts who are ADU enthusiasts, tiny home enthusiasts, that is where they play, because you can see it in action. If you want to know if it is for you, actually look at different case studies, look at different practices. There are a number of channels, even my tiny home has been featured on Tiny House Expedition and a number of others, where they highlight folks who are going this route of smaller living, of downsizing. And it gives so many stories of folks who downsized from a mansion to a tiny home and they are ecstatic. But there's also folks who it just may not work for. So you really need to think about your own lifestyle as well. Like if you are heavy on, if you are a
Mhm.
maximalist, it's probably not for
Yeah.
you.
You're going to miss your
It's
4,000
probably
square feet in your pool, right? Yeah.
exactly. You will be
Yeah.
missing that. You will be missing that in all of your things. You will feel like you are drowning in all of your things in 400 square feet if you are a
Yep.
maximalist. So really just looking at what your lifestyle is, and then looking at different examples and case studies of the tiny lifestyle, right? The tiny life, going tiny. That's literally the docuseries that I have
Yep.
as well. So it's like when you look at that, you're kind of able to gauge, okay, can I really do this? And then also just opening your mind a bit, because prior to my structure, my ADU being finished and completed, a lot of folks would look, it's like, wait, it's only like 300 square feet. You're not going to have
Yeah.
any space. And then anytime, every single time, I kid you not, someone sees it or they walk in it or they tour it, they're like, this is way much. 300 square feet is not as small as you
Yeah.
guys think.
Especially the way you lay it
Like,
out, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So it's just really like just kind of taking those expectations and the ideas that you have in your head and actually like putting factual and logical information to them. Because oftentimes what people look at as like, oh, 300 square feet in your head, what you're visualizing is actually about 100
Mhm.
square feet. And that's a bit smaller than what we're
Yeah.
talking about.
And did you have to get creative with storage? You said you had to create different
Mhm.
storage solutions. Like, how challenging was
Yeah.
that? Because obviously storage is key when you have 300 square feet, right?
100%, 100%. And I will be totally honest in saying that I also have a storage unit as
Mhm.
well, where some of the things that I don't need direct access to immediately, that is where I'm keeping some of those things. But absolutely getting creative with the storage. Number one, under bed storage, like elevating your bed a little more so that you can have under bed storage. There is a closet within the tiny house as well. And then on top of that, the lofted area that I actually have, that is now primarily just used for storage. Previously, it was actually like a small sleeping area, but at that point, we've moved the bed on the ground
Mhm.
floor, and that loft is primarily just used to store the things.
Hmm. So, Precious, how can people get more familiar with who you are and the work you're doing with Gather ADU?
I would definitely say my YouTube channel. My YouTube channel has documented the process very heavily, and then I've also on my channel I feature all of the podcasts in the different places that I've talked about this. So that would be the best place for you to get familiar. And then honestly, just Google. There have been a number of articles written just about what I've done, the process, and all of that. So if you are wanting to like read up on what the journey has been like and how I've been able to get to this point, and just be in this ADU space, then absolutely, like, just Google, find some articles, and then you'll be able to find everywhere that you can actually reach out to me as well. I am on every
Okay.
platform, unfortunately.
That's a good thing in business. Now, you're also an Atlanta realtor, right? So if somebody
I am.
watching or listening to this wants to move to Atlanta, they got to find a realtor. Come on, we're going to plug you on this platform. How do they find that?
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. And I like to say, like, I am that Georgia ADU realtor. You Google Georgia ADU realtor, I should pop up as well. Because honestly, if you are wanting to do something like this, right, it is very imperative that you have someone who understands land use, who understands zoning, who knows that, okay, if you purchase in this area, then yeah, you would be able to do it. All of this is dependent, so it's super important for you to get an expert. And I am an ADU expert, so if that is something that you are wanting to do, whether you want to add it to your existing house or you know that you are wanting to buy in an area or a place where you can do an ADU, that's something that I can totally assist with. That's my area and specialty.
Okay, that's great. Well, Precious Price, thanks for hanging out with us today, and we really appreciate you making the time.
Absolutely. I appreciate you. Thanks so much, Mike.
You bet. And that'll do it for this episode. Drop us a comment and click that subscribe button if you haven't already. Show us some love, help out the algorithm. And we love hearing from you guys. So tell us if you've ever considered downsizing and moving into an ADU. Why or why not is tiny living for you? We want to hear from you guys. Leave us a comment and also check us out always at mikecpodcast.com. Till next time, bye everybody.